There's the discussion that's been going on about compound claims or premises. That's one point. And part of that also, there's a discussion that I've had several times with Stephen about what is an acceptable claim in the base layer and what isn't. So that's one direction we can go. But I don't know, Marc-Antoine, if you want to try
with my perspective. Yeah, it will be a bit partial, but maybe I should get into that. Though I see, in a way, it's point, right? For me, the whole difficult notion is claim identity, and I just, as a bit of status, Jamie gave this conference, I don't know if you saw, and I participated, and just for the heck of it, I started doing, okay, this is what argument JSON LD could look like at this stage of my understanding. And because there was a deadline, I was forced to fall back to known practices, which is not what I want to do, which is to create an identity for the concept and say, oh, it has this label. I made the label into a value object because I still don't believe it is. Hi, Carl.
Hey, good morning.
Yeah.
Or evening, I guess. Hi. Daytime.
Yeah. No, I'm just going over, giving a kind of status report of where I'm at. It's because we're in a way I said I would do today, and in a way I'm not where I wanted to be, but I'm still giving a status. So other topics are welcome, but I just want to point out where I'm at. So as I said, I was doing strawman linked data schema for arguments for Jamie's presentation, and it's totally a straw man. And I found myself doing what I said I wouldn't want to do, because trying to do it fast and giving identity to concepts as opposed to only statements. And I realized it's unavoidable, and I hate it. And I'd like maybe to go into the notion of what's immutable that we are having with Stephen. Last time we said, there's something that's immutable because we want to be able to refer to things that are stable on the one hand. Statements are clearly immutable, that's fine. And that's why I'm trying to base everything on statements and relationship between statements, which again are asserted and immutable as such, though they can be contested, but that's different. Concepts for me are always mutable. The state of a knowledge about a concept can be immutable, but the concept itself is necessarily mutable. Still, we need to refer to concepts. That means we have a concept identifier, which I would see as distinct from its statement. It should be an opaque identifier, probably. And at a given point, we're saying this concept is ideally expressed through this statement. Though that may change, we may decide to give a better definition, or we may decide that the concept is unclear and split it and merge it and all these nice things. So ideally, the concept identifier should give us an object with a history of changes, of concept changes. Now, each of those are immutable events, but the concept itself is mutable. It's not an immutable object. So the concept is an identifier for a mutable thing. And then as part of that concept, it's all statements which have been interpreted as this concept, some of which may be interpreted as multiple concepts. But hopefully there is a kind of, well, here's the best expression we have for this concept. And that's the one we'll be using in this system or in this context or in this.
So what's the main use
community.
case for this concept? Because I understand what you're saying, but like when and who will use this thing you're calling concept right now?
The whole point is unification, either between systems or within a system. I've expressed something one way, you've expressed something another way. We've made different statements. We find out, well, we're really saying the same thing. So we want to be able to say those two statements refer to the same concept. To be able to say that, we need for those concepts to be nameable and as objects in the system so that we can merge them.
But your mutable concept is the result of having discovered that people have actually been using these, what you do agree are immutable statements. People use immutable statements. You're
Correct.
saying there's this mutable concept that over the time of its life will link to these two immutable statements.
Correct.
But my point is people will still be linking to these immutable statements. So
Excellent.
which actions the user when do on these that thing that you call concept?
Well, that is one, merging, saying, oh, I see what you're saying. Could it be done only at the level of statements?
I'm just
No,
trying to
it's
understand the
okay. It's a
use
valid question. It's a valid question. Now I understand
Like
it better.
when you look at a concept, what do you see and which user interaction is the user doing at that point in time for what reason?
Right.
Who creates a concept for starters? Where does it come from?
Okay. In my mind, whenever you're creating a statement, you're creating a concept at the same time. You're creating a statement concept pair. And the idea is that the relationship between concept and statements are labile, because I may discover this statement is ambiguous, so I want to replace the statement, but keep the concept. I want to keep the concept because many claims are attached to the concept. They're not attached to the statement because the statement may change. I may decide, no, this is not the statement I'm using anymore. So they're attached to the concept. So that's.
I didn't follow that.
Okay.
So I create a statement and automatically I also create a concept. So concept creation happens automatically with introducing statements, meaning that at that point in time, there's probably only one statement linked to that concept, correct?
Correct.
Okay, then what happens?
Then what happens is that I start making claims about that statement. Like suppose the statement is not a
statement or concept.
Well, that's the point. I'm actually making the claims about the concept.
But which one is the user doing? Is the user making, like in a user interface, what are you doing? Are you adding supporting claims to the concept or to the statements?
Well, the user interface probably won't expose the opaque identifiers most of the time. So from the user standpoint, the user will see making claims about the statements because the statements are the visible face of concepts. However, one second, I'm not done.
Okay.
Suppose I rename the concept. I say, no, this is not the right statement to describe this. Let me make this other statement to describe it better. Now, ideally, the claims should still apply, not because they're bound to the concept and not the statement. But I should know, by the way.
So you're saying, in other words, that for the only way that for that to work is that you add claims to the concept, not to the statement.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
But they're one and one the same-ish because they get created at the same time.
Oh, only at the beginning. They get created at the same time, which means they start out the same. That doesn't mean they stay the same. That's the point.
Is it possible to get an example of a concept in a statement? Because I've been trying to follow abstractly, but I don't understand what a concept is.
Perfectly fine. Let me start with a simple concept, which is an entity, not a claim. Okay. CO2 is a statement. So I'll create the concept CO2. And then
CO2 is a statement?
What?
CO2 is a statement like carbon dioxide?
It's a statement. It's a term that defines an entity. Yeah, it's a statement as such. It's not a claim statement. It's an entity statement.
Okay.
Okay. I could also use a claim statement such as CO2 causes global warming. Okay. Actually, global warming is a statement. And CO2 causes global warming is a claim statement as opposed to an entity statement. And now I decide, you know what, global warming creates confusion. I'd rather say climate change. So I'm renaming the global warming concept with the new statement, the new entity statement, climate change.
Okay,
Right.
so can we stop you right there, because that's the essence of the problem. So you're saying that people that at some points they create the CO2 statement, automatically the concept gets created. Now someone else comes in and they rename the statement associated to the same concept that someone else has been linking, supporting, and opposing claims to, or whatever in the case of an entity. So
yes.
let's take the case of claims. Like all of a sudden, the supporting and opposing claims no longer pointed to global warming, but to climate change. Like, how is the assumption here that everyone will agree, or that it gets curated, or what happens here? How?
Absolutely.
My use case is exactly that you cannot assume there is agreement, and this is
and I agree totally with you. I agree totally. Agreement cannot be assumed. It's this.
So how do you resolve this agreement?
At this point, what you say is there's a proposed change on the underlying concept. So do you want to review your statement to see if you still agree with the modified, with the proposed change? The idea is changes are proposed. And if everybody agrees, that's fine. And if some people disagree, then we might say, okay, is there a distinction why this would apply to this one and not that one? Like maybe you could say, oh, it applies to either, they're equivalent, and that's fine. Or you could say, no, actually climate change and global warming are not the same. And there's actually, this statement applies to global warming, but not to climate change.
And what if you don't hear back from these people? Like when and how?
Let me finish that case first. Let me finish that case first. You're interrupting. This is when you know you have to split the concept. Somebody says this statement is true in this case, not in that case. So we were introducing a distinction, and the distinction is useful so that the next time somebody comes and says, oh.
But I get that point, Michael, when I'm asking, because what I don't get is exactly that. Like, when do you split? Because suppose 10 people have referred to the concept. Now somebody wants to change the statement of the concept, like two people agree. What do you do with the other 8? The other ones, you haven't heard back from them. It's like they've linked to it at some point or whatever. And what do you do?
It's perfectly valid. Well, you will then note that they made this statement at this stage. This is why you keep history. At this stage in the concept's evolution, you still have access to the old version. So it might be outdated, but it was made at this stage when the concept was defined this way and had these distinctions applied to it or not applied to it.
So how is this different from just pointing to the statement directly and making it immutable and not having this distinction between concept and statements and just only having immutable statements?
Because you see the evolution, like you can choose to update the fact that the claim applies to the new statement, and you can decide, I accept the evolution. And even if the original author doesn't, who cares? The original author isn't there anymore. I accept the distinction. I make this thing evolve. And actually, I have a whole plan about community evolution of concepts, including in the absence of original authors. But basically, what happens is you have, in a given social group, what is accepted by the community, and the community has its own social rules. It may be majority, it may be consensus, it may be whatever, but or I could just personally make the concept evolve. But the idea is each concept evolves in its own, and if the concept diverges, because this, again, as you said, this person is not there, so it has not been the person's left.
Marc-Antoine, have a really bad connection, so I'm going to type in some questions into the chat. Is that all right?
Yeah. Is this, yeah. We were talking about interpretations of claims. Well, the interpretation of claims is the specific case. Yeah, right now it's a more general case. But I am doing things a bit differently now in that I was trying to avoid materializing concepts, because for me, the concepts are defined as a state of the relationship between statements. Now I'm realizing, no, I have no choice but to materialize it, but that means I have to keep history. Well, I don't think we have any common ground in those discussions.
Why are you forced to materialize it? Because that's what I'm asking. I'm more thinking indeed, why don't you just, what you're saying is you want to say that statement is just the same as that statement, or is better expressed as the other statement. If you store that as an immutable state and you have a community that agrees with that, then everyone that agrees with that can see the latter statement instead of the former. Like,
exactly.
I don't get why you want to materialize this concept prematurely and have mutable state where not everyone may agree, and when are you going to materialize it? Because as you have expressed, that's a group decision. So that's my question. So why is it not possible to not materialize a concept and only express it as such? Like,
because then it is harder to know that all the claims that have been made against the older statement should be revisited to see if they also still apply to the newer versions of the statement.
But isn't that just the reality of what happens? I mean, yeah, if you unilaterally decide that a statement is now a replacement of the other one and you move them all, that's a curation action and moderation action. At that point, you're deciding for everyone, you have to agree with this change. The point that I'm making is you cannot do that, hence you need to link to immutable.
What I'm saying is, if I link the claim, the derived claim, to the old statement, how do I know that, hey, the old statement's has been replaced, and so I need to revisit things? This is why I materialize the concept, which is right now.
The link is there. You materialize the fact that somebody has said that this statement should be replaced with that other one, and then you either look at that or not. And if you look at it and you agree, you can take it into account. If you don't, the old state stays there. The old version of the statement, the immutable statement stays there.
Okay, fair enough. It is possible. You're right. The reason I'm realizing it's
in a base layer,
it's okay. It's a case of, as always, computation versus memorization. I think that having an identified object is going to be to make less calculations than having to traverse those links all the time. It's pretty much that simple.
But I think the reality of it is, if you want everyone to be able to access and share the central claim repository, what I call the base layer, you will have to do that, because you cannot assume that everyone agrees that that statement replaces the other. In a high level thing building on top of this base layer, you can make assumptions within a community, and you can materialize this thing you're calling concept, where community decision has decided
I see your point.
to no longer use the old statement, but that's why it's a different layer that builds on top. My whole point is you cannot assume that for a base layer, because you're assuming that there's consensus, where the whole point is you want to model.
No. Wrong assumption. I see what your worry is. It would be a valid concern. When I link to a concept in another community, and that community has its own consensus mechanics and its own evolution of that concept, I linked to not only to the concept identity, but the version number. So that means if they evolve it, I am not bound by their consensus, obviously. But I'm aware that it's the same identity and I can ask for an upgrade of that particular concept. But it's easier to have a concept ID than to ask the server to recalculate, okay, what happened to that concept? It was replaced, it was split, it was merged, it was this, it was that. Let's have an object that encapsulates that history, that doesn't have to be recalculated by graph traversal, and that basically I'm trying to
But who maintains
materialize.
That's still what I don't get.
The system.
Yeah.
No, but
who uses the system?
The community. Each, okay, I'm a community.
So it is a mass curation, whatever people vote, and then a version gets added. Like whenever a community action decides that this concept evolves.
Yes.
Yeah, and that might be a different community for each time that concept evolves.
Yes, different communities will have their own copy of the concept with the same identifier or different identifier, and then we need bridges between identifiers.
No, but they're not even different communities. Even within communities, each evolution
they may create
of the concept.
They may create
sub
communities. They may create sub communities, yes, or they may split the concept, and they may, as a community, decide to split the concept, and that becomes a community decision.
I think you're getting my point. Like if I, as part of this community, decide to take a concept at a particular version, history, and time, and at that point, there's 3 members of this community that decide to evolve it, and I disagree, or I don't want that, or I linked specifically to an older version, and my entire thing that I'm building upon assumes the older version, and I haven't had time to review whether or not I want to use a new version. They're also still linking the old version, which is immutable. So why? I don't get it. Because
okay, no, it's a perfectly, no, it's I think I've answered that, but I'll answer again. Okay, you're using the old version, of course. You don't want to be bound by the community's decision. That's legit. But then when you do want to review the community's action and see, does that make sense to me? The question is, at that point, are you just looking at what you're doing is looking at the community evolution. Is that a query, or is that a materialized object? And I'm saying, let's make it a materialized object.
In a split, it's arbitrary, right? So suppose you split a concept into 2. Like, which of the 2 will I be pointing to? That's arbitrary. The point is split in 2. So you're arbitrarily going to say, oh, no.
No, it's not. Okay, the split was presumably
split in 3, or
the split has to be justified by a differing argument, right? Saying, oh, these 2 are different because of this criterion, this differentiating criterion. So you'll look at the history of the concept. You'll say, hey, it's been split. Here is the differentiating criterion. Do I?
But
which one is the one that I really meant?
I'm pointing to a concept. You're saying I'm pointing to the concept, not a statement.
Yes.
So at a certain point, there is a split. What happens with are there 2 new concepts and an old one, or are there 3, or like what happens? Or one of the 2 is that the one that I originally linked to, or?
Okay, well, the old one doesn't stop existing. I think in most cases, what you would want to do and say, the old one's obsolete and it's been replaced by these 2 new ones, though you could, in theory, have one of the new ones be the continuity of the old one. I don't think that's precisely vital either way. But let's say there's 2 new ones. I think it's cleaner. So you would say, okay, the evolution of this concept has went on until there was a split. So I will want to decide which one I want to use now if I decide to update.
How is this different from having it fully immutable, where you just link to a statement and you say this statement, there's this agreement, and there's 2 more precise statements here? How is that different?
I'm materializing the history, so I don't have to do a graph traversal every time I ask for the further history. I'm materializing that query. It's all I'm doing.
But you have to. You just said that the history stops there. The old concept, there's now 2 new concepts. You still have to reverse.
No, but it tells me, but it's materialized that here are the 2 new concepts that are used. Instead of doing a query, okay, which concepts are based on this old concept? I'm materializing. Now you look at those 2 instead.
Yeah, I'd have to see it in code. I don't feel a real difference. I don't see a benefit of doing mutable.
My intuition is statements will change much more than concepts. And basically, if claims which build on more atomic concepts point to statements, I'll have to change them all the time. There'll be a ridiculous churn of higher level statements based on lower level statement churn. By providing an identity to the concept, I reduce the churn. That's my reason for doing this. Carl? You sounded like you had something to say.
Oh, no, I wasn't saying anything. Yeah, just sort of taking it in.
Okay.
I mean, my approach is different.
Of course.
Like I'm with you on the concept thing, right? I think with claims, like I've said, what makes a claim unique is the concept, right? But I don't see the concept changing. And this is why, like, I see the concept is stuck at whatever disambiguation you chose, which is why concepts can be ambiguous. And my solution to this sort of thing is always try again, like make a new claim with new disambiguations and retry the same evidence, essentially. And so you don't have people, you might have bad definitions or whatever, and that shows ambiguity, and you get you get different opinions on what's a relevant argument and not, and all that. But you don't have this debate about what the concept is, right? It's there, and you can debate that. And if you want to try a more specific or better defined version, clone it. And
okay, so what you're saying is you would not necessarily, suppose we have the original claim. Let's take my example, right? CO2 causes global warming. Global warming gets redefined to climate change. Then we look, does the old statement, CO2 causes global warming, still apply? Yes, then let's actually redefine CO2 causes climate change. Like, let's upgrade that one as well. But what's important is that I'm saying CO2 causes climate change is an upgrade of CO2 causes global warming. And if somebody else comes up with the claim CO2 causes global warming, I'd say, by the way, most people now prefer to use this new statement because it's clearer for all kinds of reasons.
Well, there's I mean, there's, if it's a well-defined, in other words, if it's a disambiguated claim, then you would have a reference or some sort of definition as to what you mean by global warming. And,
yes, absolutely.
And I don't see a one-to-one relationship between a statement and a claim, right? I see that.
No, it's not. It's many to many.
Right. And so I don't see an upgrade on the concept of global warming. I see a new claim that is, no, we're using this definition now of what I want to talk about, which is climate change.
And that was my question. Do you see those two claims, the ones expressed by the two statements, as disconnected, or would you find a way to relate them somehow? Because I think it's important
I
to
want
relate
all concepts related in some sort of knowledge graph, right? Some sort of ontology or something where everything's related. So you can, for a lot of features, you know, if you want to talk about use cases, there are a lot of use cases I have for why I want them interconnected. But I would want to see them connected. Yeah.
Right. And what I'm saying is that the CO2 causes climate change claim claim concept would be connected to would be the same concept as CO2 causes global warming. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, maybe there's a distinction, but assuming there's no distinction, assuming it's really a concept evolution, that link between statements would be based on the link between the global warming entity statement and climate change entity statement. It's more obvious with CO2, carbon dioxide, which are unambiguously equivalent. The whole point of changing global warming to climate change is there was a nuance of meaning. So there are distinctions, there are claims that apply to one and not the other. But most important claims transfer to one from one to the other, and we want to make the transfer. So, and this is why I'm materializing concepts. Yeah, the question, Stephen, is those links. I'm materializing the concepts because the concepts are the concept identifiers are more stable than the statements. I would put it that way. The concepts are not stable, but concept identifiers are more stable than the statements.
I mean, yeah, I don't think you can explain better than that. For me, the summary is really a concept is an elusive thing which you might think you share, but the only thing you really share is the statements you use to express them. And at any given point,
bingo.
If you, yeah, but that's exactly my point why I don't even materialize concepts.
No, but, and this is why I do, because what I'm saying is I'll probably have, you know, we've probably created the statement separately, right? And I've created my concept from it, you've created your concept from it, and I'll say tentatively.
In your head, yes, not materialized in your head.
No, yeah. No, in my info space on my system and in your info space on your system, when I said, you know, I create a concept object every time I create a statement object. Mm-hmm. So if we've both created the statement, we've both created concept objects, which are not identical a priori, then we say, oh, it's the same statement. Could it be the same concept? But that's tentative. That's the whole point. And then we can say, well, we're actually making the same claims about those concepts. So yeah, let's solidify, and maybe one of us will choose to use the other concept because it's more common. Maybe we'll use knowledge graph, Wikidata, identity, or whatever, because it's close enough to what we want. So we'll use a social identifier instead of a personal identifier.
So a concept represents what agreement on a statement and underlying claims among a set of people. Is that what you're saying? If you have to put it in words?
A concept is the identity I'm giving to a concept which seems to be the same idea between you and me because we're making the same statements about it. And it's not just one statement, it's many statements. It's everything that's said about it.
But at any given point that can, like,
yes, it can.
Suppose I no longer believe in one of it. Okay, as a definition, I think it works, and I don't necessarily disagree, but I don't see why you would materialize it. I mean, if you never materialize it, if you have a set of 3 people, right, and they all believe in a certain concept, and they also believe in the same claims associated to that concept, by definition, you can then, as a derivative calculation, you can say these people share the same concept, expressed as the set of these shared claims they all believe in. But at any given point, anyone can like say, I no longer believe in that claim because they got convinced one way or another. And now all of a sudden your concept is broken. Like if you don't materialize it at any given point, you can do that calculation. It's a derivative of materialized statements.
I was going there.
Whereas if you materialize it, you don't resolve anything because then you're splitting, and all that's my point. I don't see how this is useful.
Okay. No, that's important. Let's get into that. When I said everything that's said about it, of course, that's an overstatement. It's the whole. If we come back to the Aristotelian definition of essential characteristics, I want to give an example instead of speaking abstractly.
This may be, this may or may not help, but what helps me most in this kind of discussion is when we talk about the Satoshi Nakamoto doesn't care about the environment statement. Because, you know, it all depends on how you define your Satoshi, right? And you can have ambiguous ones You can have one that is Satoshi as defined by a group of people that made the white paper. You can have it defined as whoever published the white paper. You can have it as a specific person you assume is Satoshi, and these are all different versions of the same claim. And the where the debate goes depends on that, because if you choose a generic definition of Satoshi Nakamoto as Satoshi Nakamoto obviously doesn't care about the environment, and my definition for Satoshi is whoever produced the white paper, right? Then you can say, well, that's not true because the white paper was produced by a group, and this member of the group, there's public documents of them worrying about the environment here, and it was discussed within the group. So in that claim and that debate, using that definition of Satoshi Nakamoto, you are going to include discussions about whether or not I believe it was a group or not. But if you define it specifically as Satoshi as defined by this group of people that I think is Satoshi.
Why does concept fit in here? Because we've been over this example many times, I get that. But where does the concept and where does the claim come in? And why are they two separate things? What I'm hearing you say is you have many different claims. You have a generic one, a more specific one. All I'm saying is, why not just point to the claim? Why do we need this additional notion of concept? You point to the claim with the specific specificity that you're talking about. Why do we need concept?
Let me say something here. Because I haven't really gotten an understanding yet of what we're talking about. So, I hear, Mark Antoine talking about concept and statement. What I think I'm hearing there is I'm hearing signs and I don't know, objects. Like there's something that the people are talking about. We're never fully clear if all these different signs point to that same object.
That concept.
Okay, but we're trying to figure that out. So in some cases, it's gonna be really clear. Two things really are the same concept. Other times, we may be confused. We think they're the same concept. Later, they have to be split because it turns out they're different concepts. And we're talking about this idea of this word materialize. My first thing I think of when I hear materialize is in a database, you have a query and you materialize it, make it, like actually write it down somewhere so that it's pre-calculated just for efficiency, but it's never primary above the actual query. The query is the real thing you care about. It's just, quote unquote, materialized for efficiency, but it never becomes more important, higher priority than the query, and it can be updated, on some schedule or however you want to think about it. But I think there may also, people are using this word materialize to be more like reify, like to turn something into an object, to give it like an identity and existence, that didn't exist before. So if we are talking about reification, I would say it's very helpful and important to reify, concepts or equivalence among signs, equivalence among statements, so that the system can do things with it. Like, hey, most people think that these things are the same thing. Do you agree or disagree? Click on this button, this drop-down menu here, and split this concept if you disagree. Or if you do agree, then just proceed as usual because we already thought they were all the same.
But the question is, how do you reify? Because I think we all agreed that needs to be reified at some point. The question is, do you reify it through a concept, or do you reify it through relations between signs, how you call them? I'm arguing relationships between signs. Michael Twan is arguing as a container being concept.
I think it's going to come down to the specifics, but any system needs to be flexible because the human mind is super flexible. So if you decide to make, concepts primary, you're going to have to do a lot of dancing around to figure out, oh, shoot, this thing that the system was premised upon thinking was all one concept. It turns out humans actually, have this subtle distinction. They're two different concepts. You have to find some way to deal with that in your system that's primary concept. If you have a system that's primary statements, you have to find a way to, have it be sensical. Like, okay, these two things were the same concept, and then the system split them in a job. And now the system wants to bring them back together because it turns out they are the same. There's a lot of there's this dynamic flowing that over time the system's understanding, I think, will grow. And you ideally want to have the same identifier, the third, in the third state as you had in the first state. Like there was, things were the same, they were split, they're the same. Like if there's a single concept here, you want that to be the same concept there. So anything that's dealing primary relationships, primary statements will want to do that. And to me, this just comes down to, kind of a good design problem. Like, you want someone, we should probably just write a proposal. Someone could write it up. It'll have problems. Like any one of us who write this most likely will not get it perfect. People can critique it and we get like, okay, this is how we move forward. I don't know. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's
first, thank you, Carl, for reminding me of the distinction between materialize and reify. And you're right, I meant reify in this case. Stephen, you're saying, are we reifying by relation between statements or containers of statements? And what I agree with you that the containers should be calculated based on relations. But I'm saying there's an independent usefulness to reifying the results of those calculations. That's what I'm claiming now, which I was trying to avoid until now. What?
No. So I understand. What I don't understand is how that result is calculated. What is your calculation process? Like the links, they're there, right? The people add them or they don't add them, but how do you calculate the results? That's
the valid question. Well, this is what I said earlier about the kind of topological relationship of interpretation, right? I said, if this statement can be interpreted as the statement that is, people agree that this is a valid interpretation of this. If it's symmetric, there's an equivalence relation. If it's asymmetric, it's a supposedly more specific, and the tail of these specificity relations, like if you have a chain of specificity, the end points of those chains are tentative concepts.
But when you say people agree, again, you're referring to some process.
To the relations,
people
that's
vote
exactly.
And you have a majority vote, and then
no. Okay. Good point. People agree.
That's why I separated a second layer. Once you have like some curation decided by community, which yes is valuable, I'm not disagreeing there. I'm just arguing, for me, that's a higher order concern. A base layer probably deals with the links you now are saying you do agree with, whereas indeed the second layer can reify consensus among communities. I'm not against that, but it's clear that it only reifies it for certain communities that are reified.
That's correct. But okay, for me, the interprets as is not where I see consensus issues. Like there are agreement, there is agreement about certain claims being true or not true, that's fine. But the interpretation, the question is somebody interpreting this as that? One person having that interpretation would be enough to say, okay, this is a valid interpretation. Like somebody can think that when hearing this, or can see those statements as equivalent. Now, it may be totally spurious, but it creates a link between the two statements that one could see this as a valid interpretation of that. And that's a link. And I'm basing calculations on that link. It's not a consensus effect. It's a existence thing. But so there's also an existence thing saying, no, these are not equivalent. So this is also reified. Yes.
So the way I've been thinking I would want to approach this is from a clustering sort of approach where, you know, initially the system has no clusters because there are no fusers, but then you have like a few clusters, like, you know, the basic clusters that occur to me are, you know, conservative, moderate, liberal, but I would like to get to, you know, more nuanced clusters, like more, you know, you're green inspired, you're libertarian inspired, like, you know, the various like sort of deep down influencers that tend to cause people to, you know, split one way or another on a decision. And they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, you can be, you know, green libertarian, you can have 0 to 1, you know, membership in any of these clusters. So the system then will have, and I don't call these like cluster models. And so one cluster model would be conservative, moderate, liberal. Another one might be this more fancy, you know, green libertarian. I don't know what the other things might be, you know, communitarian. You could do the fourth. Are you familiar with the political compass, like the 4 different things that I can share it in that. But anyway, you can imagine that there's different ways to sort of think about, okay, how am I going to group the people in this system? And they don't even have to be, you can use them at the same time. Like here's the, you know, the basic liberal, moderate, conservative. Here's the basic, you know, whatever. I need to finish because there's a lot more to this. And I want to make sure that we're, you know, talking about the thing that, you know, that they think matters here. And so if you allow, like, you know, that the systems can have those groupings, and you can do things like, you know, start with these predefined clusters and some preceded, like, people who agree with this statement are going to be conservative, people who agree with this statement are going to be liberal, moderate. Start with a few of those seeded, then actually clusters users based upon behavior, see how close the actual clusters that come out from behavior, like using like a community structure detection type algorithm, something like that, or like a k-means. Like I'd have to explore, like, okay, what clustering algorithms are worth using? What do they look like in practice? See, can you get them to kind of match up with these clusters? Do you find new clusters, that you need to account for, like, because your, cluster model is not a good one? But assuming that, that those engineering problems can kind of be worked through, like, okay, we have some concept of clusters, we have some way of getting people in clusters roughly, or at least showing their membership of clusters. Like, you're 60% in the liberal cluster and 10% and 5% in the conservative, 10% in the moderate, 5% in the conservative. Then you can create these concepts, these cluster, or sorry, I don't want to reuse the term. I would call them equivalence classes, or like you can group like claims or statements. Sorry, I forget which term we're using. Talking about, like, you can combine statements into clusters for those group of the people. Like, so you can say, this cluster is more likely than not to, like, if you look across the average user of this cluster, they're more likely than not to consider this group of things as a cluster. And therefore now you reify it and you say this is a cluster and it groups these things, and if it's shared with other clusters, then they all use the same one. If they have different clusterings, they use their own. And so then you have this, sort of this second, this layer of clustering is based upon, or this layer of grouping of the statements that's based upon the user clustering. And then you can allow individual exceptions to that. So, this particular user, even though they are grouped so that we think they're clustered, so they'd be like, the conservative users we think will tend to think the same. This individual has registered an exception. So to them, the UI shows, yes, this is usually grouped this way, but we've split them for you, or we've allowed some sort of way to show that, it doesn't, that you've registered your, opposition to that. Okay, that was largely what I was kind of wanted to get across as a idea.
But what is the goal of this?
I mean, to me, the goal is to get people to the interesting statements, I guess, or, for me, propositions, I've been calling them. So if a person, if I try to come to, the system, so for me, how'd you, and I, say, I don't know his name. So what's his name? Satoshi Nakamura. Anyway, the creator of Bitcoin doesn't care about the environment. And if I learn, and then the system should suggest to me, oh, based upon your previous history, you're kind of more like this sort of user. You should really think about into these terms. You should also be aware that other people look at these other terms, but you, instead of looking at the argument here, the pros and cons here, why don't you look over at this one, which is like the recommended alternative to the one you're looking at? Like, so no, it's the authors of the white paper, don't care about the environment. And here you can see like a clearly, fleshed out for you con, a disjustification, something that argues for the falsehood of the proposition that no, the authors of the white paper, it's best understood to be the author of Bitcoin, and they have published, other papers about their concern about the environment. So I'm trying to take, because people sort of start with these slogan-y type things, these sound bitty type or soundbitey type statements or claims, we might call them, but they don't often capture what's really the useful way to framing the conversation. So I'm trying to get them to the one that's useful for them to understand the truth from their perspective. But I also want to show them that, okay, but if you were to look at it from like an alternative perspective, these people who think differently than you tend to frame it this way. So if you're in kind of a critiquing mood, or you want to argue on the internet, you want to look over here to see like how that's being described. And you can feel free to, counter or add your own justifications, arguing with those people. I'm thinking procedurally, like if a human being has a question they want to answer, so they come to the site based upon an initial, statement. Oh, then it turns out, this is a more useful statement for you if you're in a constructive sort of mood. Like, how do I think best about this? If you're in a critical mood, it might be, framed this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I
mean,
understand.
just to respond really quickly, one off. I'm terribly, terribly afraid of introducing new forms of bias or reinforcing group categorizations and that sort of thing. So I see some benefit, but I see a lot more danger than benefit at this point. But it's something we can talk about in a minute.
Yeah,
No, I'm certainly concerned about that too, but yeah, I have my own, thoughts about it, but I'm definitely interested in everyone's input on that.
yeah, this is a whole different conversation, and it's a fascinating one, and I'd love to go into it as well. I do see the importance of having different communities being able to say, well, this is how we express things, but then in a way that's relatable to other communities in one click, as I keep saying, like you can start with a viewpoint, but you should be able to get out of the viewpoint easily, because otherwise we're just reinforcing bubbles. And that's a conversation Tim and I have had often. But certainly one thing I'm trying to do is refactoring a split concept into, well, this is the consensus part and this is the parts where people differ, but let's at least have the common consensus part, the so-called neutral point of view, so that we know we're talking about this thing. And that way I'm not thinking at all in terms of clusters. And clusters are emergent for me, are calculated, whereas I'm thinking more into communities converging around definitions. But let me go back, because I'm trying to avoid, in a way, I'm trying to avoid fragmentation. I'm trying to say, how can we do refactoring to say this is the same concept? And okay, one concept I really want.
I would just say about that.
One concept I really want to introduce before the.
Well, let me just say one last thing about that, is that the reason I was interested in that concept is that I allowing all of what you're suggesting about, the approach, if we don't see how to practically implement it so it's useful in a system, then I think it for me anyway, it's hard for me to understand how it, how to like sort of move forward with it. But that's the only reason I was interested in that idea.
Yeah, totally agreed. Okay, there's a big distinction between, okay, let's take global warming. There are claims about global warming that are polarizing, right? There are claims about global warming that are empirical, and there are claims about global warming that are essential. And I really want to riff on that. If I say, or I should say climate change, actually, if I say climate change will cause catastrophic weather events, and yeah, let's start with that one. That's, for me, that's an essential claim, meaning if that's not true, we're not speaking about what I call global climate change. Now, we may define what we mean by catastrophic, blah, blah, blah. But suppose I define catastrophic as, a certain number of deaths, of certain amount of damage.
Is essential, is definitional here, maybe it's similar to
yeah,
essential?
definitional, it's definitional. Okay. It's for me, that's a definitional claim. If you speak of, for example, the global change of temperature that would have no catastrophic weather event, no impact on catastrophic weather event, I'm saying we're not talking about the same thing. Call it something else. Whereas I could say, I think global warming will cause so much damage in so many years. I could be proven wrong about this and still know that we're still talking about the same global warming. That's an empirical fact, right? It's a prediction, could be true, could be false, but it won't make me think I did not understand it. It will make me think, okay, I did not understand certain predictions about global warming, but it won't make me think I got the nature of global warming wrong. I just got certain characteristics of global warming wrong, but we're still talking about the same global warming. So I really want to have this distinction, because at some point, Stephen, you were speaking about, I said all the claims that are true about, I should say all the definitional claims that are true about, or all the claims that are claimed by someone to be definitional, and that doesn't require consensus. If somebody says, half of humanity dies between 5 years as definitional, well, I'll disagree. I think it'll take more than 5 years. But I'll say, okay, we have different definitions, and
take this use case. Take this use case. We have the notion of bad claims, which we almost agree on, although that's for Wednesdays. But we agree that there are two bear claims. One is an undefined climate change. What was the claim on we're discussing? Causes from
will increase the rate of catastrophic weather events.
yeah, so climate change will increase catastrophic events. That's one bear claim. Undefined with climate change is another one. Is climate change, where you have your definition seemingly, which I actually disagree with in this case. So it's a nice example. Inherently, climate change means catastrophic events as caused as a result of whatever your definition is, right? That's another bear claim that has the same statement, but it has this definition attached to climate change. These are two separate bear claims. Why don't you just link to the one you mean? And how does the concept fit in here?
Perfectly valid question. The reason I'm interested in all this machinery is I expect at first I'll have climate change as a concept without this distinction. And then somebody introduces the distinction and it's like, okay, which one do I mean?
But the distinction is introduced as a new bear claim as well. So already you have the distinction between two bear claims.
Yes.
We're not talking about concepts at all here.
So there's a relationship between the original climate change unadorned, and then there's a relation between that and climate change adorned with a certain definition, and a relationship between climate change adorned with another definition. And so to be able to make that distinction, I have to make a query about many objects. What I'm trying to do is reify that fork so that I can say, what is the current state of my original climate change statement? Oh, it's been forked 5 times, and here are the 10 objects I would have to fetch. So I don't have to do a big query for 5 forks. No, sorry, I'm saying the same thing all over again, but you're asking the same question all over again.
No, but you're jumping ahead and I'm not following. That's why I'm saying wait, not because I don't want to hear you out. Just I can follow.
Yeah. Okay.
For me, when you make a more specialized claim, that's all you do. You just say, well, this is a more specialized claim of the other claim. So all it is, it's 2 bear claims, but I hear you saying something different. So slowly walk me through what you intend to do.
Yes, fair enough. Okay. First, I'm saying, well, this is a definition that's more precise. Then it's possible. One second. No,
but
where, me to walk
what,
you
how,
through.
where does the definition come from? On what is it applied? What does the user do? The user sees, all the user sees is a statement, climate change causes catastrophic events. That there's only a piece of statement text and it's a claim, a bear claim system. Walk me through what the user does.
Okay. Well, it depends what scenario we're looking at. There's about 5 possible scenarios here, so I'm not sure which one you want, but I'll pick one. Somebody says climate change will cause a smooth increase of temperature without increasing catastrophic weather events. That's the counterclaim. And then I say, if this happens, this is not climate change as I understand it. We're not talking about the same phenomenon.
When
so
and how do you say it, or is this in the person's head right now?
Yes, I'm getting there.
Can you
please stop interrupting if you want answers?
Yeah, but I'm trying to follow, so it would help if you make a clear distinction between things that are in the person's head and the things that are reified in the system.
Okay. Yes, I was about to. So the person wants to say we're not talking about the same thing. So the person will probably want to introduce this a claim, a specific claim, saying this claim about it doesn't use is definitional to climate change as I understand it. And that means that other claim is a contradiction of the definition. And the person who made, and so this is actually a distinction. So the concept, climate change, there's now a proposal to refine on the one hand, to say climate change should be refined into climate change such that it necessarily implies increase in catastrophic weather events. And so that's
all I'm seeing is a bad claim. So how do I select climate change, and how do I? I'm not following here.
Yes, those are links between bare claims, but it also there's the concept associated to the climate change statement, the bare climate change entity statement. And that concept will now have a history. There's been a proposed refinement here. And then the person who made the original counterclaim will say, no, that cannot be part of the definition because it contradicts my claim. So no, I'm proposing a different definition of climate change. This is, I refuse the
text
refinement.
right now, because so all there was a bad claim. There was only the text. So does the concept you introduce, does it apply to the text, to the claim,
the concept which is linked to the text has.
How is it linked? Why is a concept that is linked with climate, or how are these instances instantiated? Where do they come from?
There's a joint table because it's a many-to-many relationship.
I don't think that answers the question how these rows in the table are added in the first place.
I did say whenever a statement is introduced, we introduce a corresponding concept, and that means we introduce a corresponding equivalence row in the joint table.
The concept is the full claim, right? Climate change caused
it's a container
events.
of statements.
Yes.
It's
so that's the only concept you have right now.
Yes.
Just a parenthetical here, like, it's very clear that all your use cases come from the perspective of a conversation between people, which is totally outside the scope of my concept of the canonical debate, which is absolutely asynchronous and non-conversational. So that, like, I can see why you need, like, to introduce, like, every statement somebody says, they're obviously trying to say something, and I can see why, if you're recording a conversation and you're making, oh, there's a concept, and later you need to reconcile, that makes sense to me. But in a crowdsourced asynchronous argument,
I don't see how the crowdsourced argument is not a conversation. I don't see the distinction between a crowdsourced argument and a conversation.
Because the word, I don't, are we saying the same thing? That question is irrelevant according to my use cases, because there's no we.
I disagree. Okay.
But a we is unmanageable is another way of putting it, which is also what I was hinting at. If you have a dialogue argumentation system and they exist, indeed, you can at any given point stop the argument at that point until you get consensus on that people agree or have seemingly agreement on concepts. And then modeling this is super useful, and similar things have been done before, indeed. But indeed, I agree with Timothy's assessment here. There is no we in the sense that it's impossible to know who the we is at any given point whenever you look at a claim in the system.
I disagree in the sense that somebody entering a claim in the system is not fundamentally different from somebody making a statement in a conversation. I do not see a real difference there. We're making a statement, we're adding text.
Let me explain how I see a use case in an actual conversation, just to contrast, which would be, I'm chatting with somebody and we're talking about climate change, and I say it's going to lead to serious disasters and damage or whatever. And the other person says, no, it's going to lead to gradual change or whatever. At that point, I might go to the canonical debate and pull up a claim and say, here's proof, here's a claim that it's going to lead to disaster and everything. And I'll say this one thing, no, I don't see climate change that way. Oh, how do you see it? Oh, I found this other claim that defines climate change differently. That is, one maybe has definitionally it's going to cause, it's the drastic change in weather conditions due to human activity. And another is simply the future projection of atmospheric conditions based on current human activity, right? So one embeds in the definition of climate change it's definitely going to happen. And if that's definitely going to happen and the temperature is going to change X, then this damage is going to happen. The other thing, well, I don't see the temperature is going to change. Like, so I see the conversation happening outside and if they're outside the canonical debate, and people pulling in well-defined claims to compare. No, this is what I'm talking about. And if it's not in the canonical debate, just to finish, this is 1 second. If it's not in there, that's the moment where they maybe want to say, well, this is what I mean. So I'll type in my statement of canonical debate and I'll add my definitions. and people can debate that one. But that's how I see the line drawn between conversation and the crowdsource.
Yeah, and I still don't see the line. Let me play with the definition of conversation. It's true that there is such a thing as back and forth conversational exchange as we're doing now, and that's one form of conversation. I'm kind of defining conversation as a succession of statements emitted by someone, interpreted by others. Whether they take form in a certain context, and the context defines who gets to receive and interpret the statements emitted by someone. So that's a kind of container, which gives you the transmission topology of the statements. Anything that fits that definition for me is a conversation, because the statements that I receive and interpret will elicit reactions from me in the form of statements. And that's a conversational aspect. The fact that there's a temporal succession of statements I receive and emit, and that everybody in the conversation receives and emit, and we inter-influence based on that. So whether we do it in a Zoom, face-to-face, or in the canonical debate, for me, there's no bloody difference. We're emitting and receiving statements.
Well, the main difference is the whole world is doing that, ideally, if everyone uses it. That's the main difference.
Well, no, for me, there's a different main difference. There's a distinction between the two kinds of conversation, which is that when you're in a conversation with another person, there are temporal and continuity obligations.
Yeah.
Which means that, and a fundamental nature of that is you're creating essentially on the fly every statement, yeah. Right? And you must respond to those statements. And that in its
no,
own
for me, that's not a fundamental definition of conversations. So
let's
abstract out conversation to put that out.
No, but all right, but not that you must, but that's the general flow of a conversation, right? It's not like I'm going to stop and go and start filling out everything I feel about climate change under my definitions, and you're not going to care or notice. When we're in a conversation with each other, I can't just go and start talking about my thing, right? But what the main point is, you're creating statements on the fly, which means you're naturally creating duplications. And that's why I see a necessity of resolving those duplications depois. I switched to Portuguese. you naturally resolve, you need to resolve all those because it gets messy. Whereas in the asynchronous crowdsourcing form, probably or responsibly, your first activity is looking for the one you're talking about.
Okay, that is a very interesting distinction. I'll buy that one. It's the existence of duplicates. In a conversation, the same statement will be made twice in a canonical debate type conversation, because for me, it's still a conversation. You would have deduplicated them. But for me, it's still a conversation in that there's a temporal element, mind you, in either case, is that
I agree with that.
I receive statements in a certain order, and that prompts me to add statements in a certain order. But the notion of I'm obligated to be apropos, I don't see as essential to the nature of conversation. And that's why I'm saying as there's no fundamental difference from me in either case. I'm receiving statements in a certain order, they're deduplicated in one case, okay, fine. But I don't see that again as invalidating any of the statements I make about the canonical debate. And when you say all you're doing is in the order is in the order in which I read them.
Yeah, but that's different for every individual reading.
Correct.
CDL.
Yep, that's correct.
So is everyone done in their own conversation according to that definition, or?
Yep, they're receiving. Absolutely.
I mean, then it's pure semantics. It's not really the point that we were getting at, right?
No, but the question Tim was asking is, what you're saying is irrelevant because it only applies to conversation. Well, the way I define, I don't think that anything that Tim, one second, I don't think that anything that Tim has said applies to what's specific about conversations the way he defines it as opposed to the way I define it, and my definition includes the CDL.
Okay.
Right. I wasn't saying it's irrelevant what you're saying. I'm saying that you're coming from a very, very different set of use cases, which means your perspective on the design of this is very different from my perspective of trade-offs on the design. So
different emphasis, but I don't think it's a different set of use cases. We certainly have different emphasis. There's no question there. But
we have Wednesdays to figure that out. Let's write down the use cases on Wednesdays.
But what I'm saying is deduplication and identifying the meaning of what is said is a common use case.
Well, no, okay, and that's also a fundamental difference, I would say. The difference being, I think you place a lot more emphasis on identifying things that were said.
It's true. I put more emphasis.
And I'm about like, if you, I don't care what somebody else said. I care about.
We have a definition for it. You're talking about the bad claim, Timothy, right? The bad claim. We can use the terminology now because Mike Antoine agrees with that. So I think what you're saying is you're more interested in bad claims, and Mike Antoine is more interested in situated claims.
No, no, it's not that. First of all, I didn't catch the definition of bad claim. What is the definition of bad claim?
Bear.
Oh, bear claim. Yeah.
I think we're still arguing that definition out. But
no, I understand what you mean by bear claim here, but it's more about my approach of I don't think there should be debate, at least in whatever layer we're talking about, the layers that aren't about debating contextual statements. There shouldn't be debate about definitions. You just pose the definitions you want and hold a debate based on those definitions. You don't change definitions or say, is that the right definition or is that whatever. If it's not the right definition, if that's not what you meant, you create a different claim with what you meant and you debate that one. Because that again, that's where I see so much friction in human debating, is people not being clear on the terms and sometimes playing loose and fast with the terms and that sort of thing. And you waste too much time on that. I just want, okay, put your definition, we'll debate that one. I'll put my definition, we'll do that one. Racism is, you say what racism is, I'll say what racism is. Oh, look, all lives do matter and Black lives do matter. And we don't have to fight about using those terms now because.
Okay, that's really important. Okay, and this is a real difference of approach, and let's talk about it because it's important. Where we differ, I think, is that I assume that every effort to definition is provisional. It's not that I believe that I'll do my best to be clear and to make all the definitions clear, and somebody will still misunderstand me. And so they'll try, as you propose, to make, here's how I define it, and then I'll look at it and say, you know what, we're saying the same thing. Or you know what, okay, this is where we don't have the same definition. And that way, and then I'll want to adjust my definition to make it clear that I didn't mean what you meant, and make the distinction explicit.
So far, you're saying the same thing, right? The only difference is how do you adjust your definition? Timothy is suggesting you make a new claim. You're suggesting adjust what you mean. You can continue on that.
And here's how I see that playing out, is exactly that, where you make your definitions, and apparently people didn't understand your definitions because you get people disagreeing with you on the relevance of certain arguments, right? You get complete, that you go, oh, people are misinterpreting. I will make a new claim with more specific definitions, and let's try again, right?
And I'll want to say this claim is now superseded by that one, or can be, and what I'd really want to have, one second, is to have the base claim, the ambiguous one, to have links to both, to saying, here's how I'm clarifying it, and this is how it was also interpreted. And then in the original, associated to the original, attached to the original claim, and this is what I'm calling a concept, might have an object saying, by the way, this claim is often interpreted as either this one or that one, and reify that fork in the concept that I attached to the original statement or actually to a set of statements, because I'm dealing with equivalence class modulo equivalence. And that's why I have
Yeah,
a
so there's-
concept, a reified concept.
There's use cases there I haven't thought through, would be interesting to think through. And the rest, I think, you know, is mostly served by just having the connected graph of meanings or definitions, right? Where you
Yeah.
see all the related things. And there's different kinds of related. There's general, the specific related, but there's like maybe different interpretations related, or maybe they use the exact same statement and you go, show me all the ones that use the exact same statement. There are ways to do that. And I don't know if you need superseded necessarily, because that's done with an intention, right? Somebody has intended something and, oh, I didn't intend that one, so now I intend this one.
All right, I have to run. Good conversation, everyone. Thanks.
Yeah,
I think
thanks.
we can wrap it up either way. Sounds like
Yeah,
a nice
good way-
I
conclusion.
think it's a
I think.
good, yeah, we may have achieved some kind of consensus up to a point. I don't know how you feel, but this felt convergent, this last bit.
Talk to you
Okay.
tomorrow.
Talk to you
See you tomorrow.